and call the meeting to order. I will assume the agenda is approved because we have some great presentations today. We're looking forward to both on the sales tax use kind of plans, but also talking about Network Now. So all things transit, so it's great to have the guests that we do. And it's important that we have a quorum because apparently last time we did not. So we have 2 meetings of minutes to approve. So we'll start with September 6th, Committee of the Whole meeting. Are there any comments, corrections, additions?
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That meetings are approved. On to the meeting of September 20th. Is there a motion and a second to approve? Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion, corrections, additions? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those minutes are approved. Okay, on to our Network Now, building the foundation. And Sophia, Ginis, and Adam Harrington, and Cyndi Harper are here in the room. Take it away. Who are we gonna start with you, Sophia?
Start with Sophia.
Perfect.
Got a short person, the microphone, so it's a little closer. I'm Sophia Ginis. I'm the Director of Community Affairs. I use she, her pronouns, and feel free to refer to me as Sophia. I'll let Cyndi introduce herself as well.
Good afternoon, my name is Cyndi Harper. I am the Manager of Route Planning over in Service Development for Metro Transit, and she, her pronouns as well.
So today we want to just kind of reground everybody in the Network Now project, talk about our principal development, which is really our guiding framework for decision making. And then the last time we were before you, we talked about going and doing all this wonderful engagement and engaging our region and these collective conversations. And so we will go through kind of the background and results of all that we heard during that time, and then talk a little bit about the next steps to expect from this project. And I'll caveat too, or tee up, we're at this transitional point between this project where we're going from laying our foundation to really kind of setting some direction forward. So we hope this is also a discussion with all of you tonight. So with that, we just spent through the fall basically engaging our region in our values and principles. So the thing that they find important in our transit network. That allowed us, along with doing a bunch of technical work, to have our guiding framework. From that, we will basically create a pretty solid planning direction and then begin to evaluate our network against those principles and metrics. We'll come out with a draft plan of how we adapt our service, and then after we get some feedback from stakeholders on that, we'll come back for final adoption of the plan. That's kind of what to expect. How that all kind of fits together, what are all these phases? So really, the first phase of the project, and what we'll spend some time laying the background on tonight, is we built our foundation in this first phase of our work. It was grounded in engagement and hearing from our stakeholders, whether that's the general public, our riders, or our other regional partners such as our counties and cities. We looked at the guidance that has been set in the past by all of you, as well as collaborated with our colleagues who are updating some of that policy guidance concurrently with the Network Now project. So one left hand talked to right hand, considered both things as we developed the project. And then our talented service development folks and strategic initiatives really looked at our network performance as well as opportunities. And so kind of looking at changes that had happened since 2020 and through the pandemic and post-pandemic to then have this foundation. And Cyndi will go into that more in a minute, but I just want to communicate to you all is we did all the background, right? And now we're going to start transitioning into developing the project itself. There are questions that we have to ask. There's our network to evaluate. And then that comes into creating these priorities that we see forth and then seeking confirmation from our stakeholders. So really wanting to emphasize that this whole process is designed to lead people through how we make service planning decisions, kind of checking in along the way. And then the outcome is not a pie in the sky thing, but actually a plan that we implement, right? It's a short-term plan. So when people ask you in 2024, how did we make that decision? Well, this plan sets that up. So between kind of the background work, the evaluation, and then we have the formal confirmation at the end, but kind of bringing the people along with us as we develop that plan gets us this robust set of how we make decisions. And I'll add lastly on this slide that what you'll see tonight, our service planning department has already kind of started to take in and consider what we've been hearing through Network Now. So the decisions that you see coming out are already ones that are been informed by this process. Just a quick little refresher of what all to see. So we might look at new or to redesign things, looking at span and frequency, resolving any discontinued service, as well as if we need to close facilities, planning for our metro lines, and microtransit possibilities.
Thank you. So as Sophia mentioned, we've been working to establish our project's foundation by reviewing and considering really three main areas, which are set up as individual chapters in our Establishing the Foundation report, which will hopefully be posted on our project website later this week. So it's a very exciting milestone for us. Those three categories are network performance and opportunity, looking at the performance of today's network, as well as looking at various council policies, guidance, standards that apply. One of those challenges has been doing this work at the same time that MTS is updating the transportation policy plan, and the council in general is updating the regional development guide work, so trying to keep those coordinated. And then also finally understanding what it is that's important to our riders and our stakeholders. So understanding those three main areas, the system performance, council policies, and our riders' travel patterns and their transit needs, has led us to these 5 principles. They're not listed in any specific order or in any specific ranking. But I will read through them real quick because they are kind of the main product coming out of this first phase that transitions us into being ready to actually start working on the draft plan. So adapt service to changes in travel markets and transit markets and travel patterns. It's been a day. Prepare for new metro and other high-frequency routes. Maintain the reliability of our scheduled service consistently over time. Build on success to grow ridership, adding service where people use transit the most, and provide access to opportunities and services with a focus on advancing equity and reducing regional disparities. Some of these principles can be considered contradictory, so our work this fall will help us prioritize the importance of these principles and how they balance and interact with each other. So in order to explain how we arrived at each of these principles, I'd like to walk you through one as an example. In our report that will be posted in a couple of days, this similar background information will be available for all 5 of the principles. So the principle here is adapt service to changes in transit markets and travel patterns. We explored the responses that we received to our spring survey and during our in-person and our virtual workshops that we had in the spring, as well as the feedback that we hear all the time through Metro Transit's Customer Relations Department. Staff also analyzed network performance and operational data and considered what the Council's Transportation Policy Plan has to say. We observed, or background information, that while some transit markets have changed since 2020, others were already changing prior to the pandemic. Competition from ride-sharing companies, higher rates of automobile ownership, and relatively low gas prices were impacting ridership even before 2020. We've also observed that increased telecommuting has resulted in fewer workers in the office, lower levels of traffic congestion, and abundant low-cost parking options in the downtowns, all of which have made driving alone more attractive. Sorry. We've also seen that single-purpose trips, such as commuter or express routes, have been our least resilient in terms of ridership and bouncing back. Higher income riders are more likely to have other alternatives. And as a result, we're seeing much less of a difference between our peak and our off-peak ridership. On the other hand, we also were looking for opportunities. High school and college students are a key market for us now, especially due to an increase in either low-cost or free pass programs through the schools. The number of second and third shift lower wage jobs in the region has increased, along with the need for additional flexibility to be able to work overtime whenever the employer's shifts change. And we've also seen through Metro Transit's micropilot, transit can adopt technology like algorithms in order to schedule rides in real time.
So we kind of started the presentation with the conclusion because we wanted to see you where we got to. But I'm going to spend a few minutes going a little bit more into what we heard and how we came to what we showed you. And part of why we want to do that is to really demonstrate that we take feedback from our stakeholders and the public very seriously as we make decisions. So we spent hundreds and hundreds of hours out and about to really get robust feedback and lead this project with engagement work. So that was, to do that, we met directly with municipal partners. We had many meetings in the community, so like come to us, here's this event. But we also did a lot of rider and pop-up work, and that intercept, as we call it, intercept work, was really trying to target especially our low-income riders that might be less likely to take a survey or engage with us in other ways, so making it easier to give participation. We also reached out to stakeholders, community organizations around the region, and basically was like, hey, can we come to your thing, please, and talk about this project? And many folks took us up on that. In addition, we did our traditional marketing efforts and put out social communication. From that, we received over 5,000 responses or points of contacts with the public, including about 6,000 unique comments. And so that was both in the survey and from our customer relations data. Again, they were received through a variety of means, kind of whatever way people wanted to come to us, whether it was through a survey or, you're on a bus and somebody maybe finds the survey intimidating or too much, but they'll have a conversation with you. We take field notes and we recorded those and considered them in the feedback we received as well. The survey itself, which ran from February to May, had over 4,000 responses, most of whom were from the public, but we did also specifically reach out to government agencies and ask them to complete the survey and had conversations with Metro Transit frontline employees to have their perspective as well. Each were considered kind of individually as we analyzed the survey. A little bit of a refresher of what the survey included. So we asked 12 trade-off questions. So you had to choose option A or option B. And the reason for that is when these folks make service decisions, often they can't do both things, right? They have to pick. So we kind of forced our community to think about those similar trade-offs so that we can really set priorities. We also gave them points, or if you think about it in terms of money, or available resources, however you want to consider it, and ask them to allocate those points. And so, and we asked them basically 3 types of questions related to that. They also are able to provide open-ended questions, and we asked demographic questions. And the main reason for asking the demographic questions was, one, as people were responding to the survey, we could see where there was gaps and try to do targeted outreach during that time to reach those communities. And we'll get into the percentages in a second, but we got such a high response rate that even, we ensured that our outreach left it so that we could cross-tab various demographic groups. So even if percentages were lower of a certain group, we had enough respondents to have good survey data. So with that, just a high-level overview of kind of some of who we heard from. 35% of folks were frequent riders. About 66% were between 25 and 64 years old. We did some targeted outreach to our high school riders because that's a big demographic of ours. And then, of course, the breakdown of gender and then race and ethnicity. We wanted a little bit higher people of color response, but really did a lot of targeted outreach to make sure that we had those numbers. And then household income being a big driver as well, so kind of making sure we were hearing from everybody. Since Metro Transit serves our region as well, we wanted to make sure responses came from all of our service area. And you kind of see the yellow-green is where we got kind of more people responding, but just really kind of checking off the box that it was about intentionally making sure we're hearing from everyone. A lot of Minneapolis and St. Paul, but then we also wanted to make sure we were hearing from our inner and outer ring suburban communities. I also note that when you see percentages, that people don't always respond, so try not to add things up to 100 because they don't always add up to 100. That 830 missing is an example of that. So I'm going to provide just one example of how people responded to the survey and then how that helped us inform our principals. And so this was an allocation points question about ridership, equity, coverage, and geographic evenness. And part of why we ask this is people sometimes use some of these terms interchangeably to mean different things. And so we really wanted to pull that out. So each one had definition to it. And then you could kind of see the overall ranking that people gave, most often giving to ridership, but then also really acknowledging that equity and coverage and some amount of geographic evenness was important. When we split that up by race, we see a fairly similar distribution of that points, but a little bit more towards equity and coverage, given towards equity and coverage. And that same order still applies when you pull cross-tab folks by income, but that spending towards equity and coverage and geographic evenness is even then more pronounced, right? So noting that everybody, kind of the message that ridership is important, and that is reflected in one of our principles as well, but then this ability to get places and consider the needs of folks is also then is reflected in our principal development. But then also wanting just to show how really looking at our different riders and uses and considering various needs. So with that, we are now armed with a set of principles, and from that, we'll kind of create more robust planning guidance to kind of evaluate our network against. And so as we think of questions and what we might need to adopt, we have this framework in which to evaluate decisions. From that, we'll begin to develop a plan, and of course, update our stakeholders as we advance our work. So now you know where we are and where we're trying to go. And so as we really start to roll up our sleeves, whatever that analogy is, and think about the changes that we need to make, coming to all of you to say, did that feel right? And is there anything else that you really want us to consider as we take our next steps?
Riva.
Thank you. Quiet.
It's really quiet.
Well, thank you for the presentation. It gives us a little bit more depth into what the network now might look like in the process and evaluation of our stakeholders. But the new and redesigned routes, I guess my interest is looking at where we have existing gaps in service. I've often talked about areas where we have a lot of service and areas where we have very limited service. So if we could take this network now planning as an opportunity to address the limited service, particularly outside of the urban core, that would be great. Or even areas in the urban core that are not on the typical routes.
Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss. That was a conversation we also began to engage with some of our municipal partners as they let us know in both our customer relations feedback and in the open-ended survey questions people gave us specific asks. So that'll be definitely something that we consider.
I just wanted to point out that as we're working to build this plan between now and 2027, so it's a fairly short-term plan. Although we are all happy that the regional sales tax has now started up, we still are operating in a constrained environment, and that constrained environment is mostly workforce. I know there's been tons and tons of discussions about that, and so part of the reason that we're doing this network now exercise planning scenario is because we know we've already made a lot of commitments as an organization to various transitway projects and other capital projects that will be coming online between now and 2027. Those all take an increase in staff to be able to deploy those. And so the question is, okay, we've already promised a certain amount of this. What do we have, realistically, what else do we have available in the next couple of years and being able to manage expectations? Because of course, expectations are high with the new sales tax, but we also know that we're not going to be able to roll out a budget service overnight. So it's really helping us to manage expectations, but also really to plan for as our workforce continues to grow, and we're on a good track to how to manage that. We have to be in a situation where we are growing service incrementally because that's the way we hire. Unfortunately, sometimes when some of these transitways open up, that involves a large increase in employees all at one time. We have to kind of massage that to figure out how to make that work. We can't hire people now and say, oh, you're going to work the beeline, but we're going to put you in the supply closet for the next 18 months. We have to find something to do in the meantime. We certainly don't want to be doing things that we undo later. So that's really part of the attention here, is just trying to, what all do we want to do, both to understand how our service has changed and has not changed, but also set some realistic expectations for what can we do in the next 4 years.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I think that's a good point to talk about the new sales tax dollars and the requirements that we're gonna have a presentation on that as well today, and looking at the requirements for looking at bus rapid transit as well as microtransit and active transportation. Also the wage adjustments, so hopefully that can help us with the worker shortage. But I definitely see a tie to and kind of want to understand more in terms of how we can support through our policy to utilize the new funding for some of those goals.
One of the things that we heard when we were talking particularly with frontline operators that in our service planning process we can influence is to make the job more attractive, and whether that means making sure that looking at how we design our runs, making sure that operators have sufficient time in between trips, be able to use the restroom, things like that. So that is something that from a planning side we have some control over. At least once we have somebody who says, hey, I'm interested in doing that job, and they try it out for a few days and they don't say, oh, this is terrible, I won't have anything to do with this, we can at least hopefully once they've expressed interest give them a positive experience when they're behind the wheel or maintaining the buses or whatever their particular job might be.
Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson, and then Sue.
Oh, Sue, are you ahead of me?
I didn't see you first.
Okay, well, I'll just jump in because it's about, so this is something that I'm, really gonna dig into in management as far as labor shortages across the council. Because we see all the budgets, we also approve a lot of interim contracts, whether it be for interim safety out on the stops or certainly we're in negotiations right now, and that's all I'll say about that. But this is a big deal for us, and that's why as we bring on these new lines and we're looking at finishing Southwest, and we've got BRT Purple line, and we've got the Blue Line extension coming on. I mean, we are, if you extrapolate that out and you do some simple math, we are not on target to really get where we need to be. And I will just say this, could you, first of all, we love our drivers, our mechanics, we love everybody at the council. But, realistically, when I hear, it's said that we have to make sure they have time to go to the bathrooms and like their jobs. Could you imagine if we had a job where we didn't know if we could make it to the bathroom in time? Could you imagine, some of the things they are confronted with, just being in the general public every day? Great people on the buses, but people who, struggle. Then you're dealing with the elements, you're dealing with schedules, you're dealing with other drivers and people out there. I mean, I just think that we have to just really back up a step here and look at the, role of an operator and the importance and the technical skills that they bring to a region-wide critical asset that helps everybody with their, economic prosperity. So we'll have some of those discussions in management. But I just want everybody to know that this new money coming in does go to workforce. It does go to safety. And, everybody's working through, and we'll get the presentation, but they're working through how to meet that up. And while there's new money coming in, and thank you to the legislature, thank you to the governor, thank you to Judd and the team and the chair and Deb and everybody who's been really telling the story of the fiscal cliff. But it doesn't solve everything unless we have a strategic way to solve it. So we have a lot of tactics out there. But what I'm challenging through Phil is to have each division come, and I've talked with Lesley about this too, and she's embracing it. But what strategic plan can we put in place, whether it's IT, public safety, Metro Transit, to really be, I think, the shining star that you want to work at the council, and you want, we're barely competing with these other agencies, whether it's police or drivers. I mean, school bus drivers make more, and police officers everywhere, we're just barely, keeping even with that. So I think that if we're gonna make these promises to the region, and we are, that this is where the transit way advancement policy and just the, work at Metro Transit on our system, we have to take a look at the red lights are flashing now. And we can solve this, but we have to get ahead of it because we are hiring new people, but we're losing people every year. And it's a math problem. You can extrapolate this out, and we're gonna still have to be, really managing this very carefully. So I know there's an ideal out there that we want. The appetite is out there for service everywhere, including the far-flung suburbs. But I'm just gonna continue to call out that this is a priority for this council to get figured out, to how we compete and get people to want to work at this council, and not just at Metro Transit, but in IT, all of that stuff. I mean, so if you're on management, stay tuned, because I really hope we get some of this information just to know where we're at and just to know what that bigger strategy is gonna be. So I just wanted to say that because I think this is very important, and even with the new money coming in, I can hear, in just about every conversation we have about this, there's tension and a bit of hand-wringing around it, and we need to pay attention to that. And that's our job to do that. Nobody else will do that for us. So I'm taking it very seriously, and I hear you. Thank you. So, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. We have Bento and followed by Harper.
I want to second what Councilmember Johnson said about bathroom breaks. As a former elementary school teacher, first and third, I know that struggle all too well. I remember it vividly. Went before the bell rang in the morning, and then you waited until lunch. And you just hoped to God that there wasn't going to be any kind of an issue in between. And I also want to echo what Councilmember Johnson said about the in and outdoor. As we have new employees coming in, I'm concerned about the number that are going out, and I'm particularly concerned about our demographics. Just like the rest of society, we've got a baby boom that's going through, and we're going through significant retirements. And I'm curious as to how much analysis we've done on this from an age standpoint to project out where we're gonna be. I think that would be helpful to know as a council. I'm curious going forward, Cyndi and Sophia, regarding the Metro Transit possibilities. We had a micro transit presentation, I think it was last week, in the Transportation Committee. And I know it was post-COVID, I just can't remember. Anyway, I'm curious as to whether the thoughts will be to broaden the North Minneapolis Micro Transit Program or to give up, take these possibilities to other parts of the region. And, oh, good, thank you, Adam.
Welcome, Adam.
Thanks, Councilmember. It's a good question, and you may recall at the end of the presentation, we kind of framed out some of the next steps. We have a group of staff working on how we advance microtransit and how we might prioritize it, because there's interest from all points of the region. But we're really looking at how to evaluate what our capacity of growth can be. So similar to just regular route bus operators, same thing with microtransit operators and vehicles and technology. So we're evaluating that right now, knowing that we've got demand from all places, but we also want to test in new markets to see where maybe microtransit can function as more of a coverage and accessibility route that's different than in the urban area. So we're evaluating those things now to see how they might compare to each other and really hopefully develop a prioritization system so that we can move that forward. The other thing I'll say for this group is that we'd like to collaborate with our suburban providers that already do this, so we can share some learned experience and maybe come up with some continuity of how we approach it.
And then Chair Lesley, Councilmember Bento, Councilmember Johnson, I also just wanted to point out to your first point about our workforce, to maintain the reliability of our scheduled service consistently over time. That was something that we heard from our customers was important, right? Like having something show up when we say it's going to show up is paramount. But also from our operators, being on time is important to them. They want to deliver that service, and they see that turnaround time. If they're running late, right, that turnaround time to even start a run late. And so just being really conscious of those needs and how that impacts our workforce is that it's brought in strongly as a principle that we can use as we go forward, because it both benefits our workforce and it benefits our customers.
Thank you. I would have another question, but Adam, being efficient, answered it first.
Ahead of the game, that's transit ahead. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very excited to see this proceeding. So for the council members who don't know, this is work we actually started before the pandemic and had to put on hold during the pandemic. So it's exciting to be able to be working on this and seeing it in advance now to see a real transit vision taking place. And I think this is the perfect time because I think the legislature truly tasked us with building out a transit vision. So I think, all of these things kind of coming together at the right time are really, really important. And to the point of Councilmember Johnson and Bento and to what you were saying, Sophia, reliability is key as we're looking at this. Anytime you're out talking to anyone on the transit system, and we've talked a lot about this at TAB, that it matters more, like if your transit time might be a long time, that's okay, as long as you know that this is when I get on, this is when I get off, and you have that reliability and consistency, so that's really good to keep in consideration throughout everything. One question I have is we are approaching this looking at it as we've been talking this post-COVID environment and how we're going to do this. Have we been talking with businesses at all in case, because there's a push and pull right now of, work from home, hybrid, go back to the office, and we're kind of at a tipping point of where that might land.
Yes, as part of, well, first of all, just our regular everyday work. For example, I know Adam talks a lot with the Downtown Council about what they're seeing in terms of their member organizations. The chapter in the report that comes out in just a couple of days that we'll make sure that everyone gets a link to, the performance chapter does do quite a bit of looking at what has changed, and it's everything from looking at ridership on various types of services and how those have changed, and our commuter express routes have been, of course, probably the most significant change. Looks at what we're seeing, but that doesn't mean, but we are seeing other places where we are, that are positive, that we think are great. And so how do we to really kind of take advantage more of some of that and grow the system overall? One of the challenges certainly with teleworking and with our commuter express riders is that we run weekday, Saturday, and Sunday schedules, but it's inefficient if we provide the level of service you need for maybe a Wednesday or a Tuesday 5 days a week. And so that's one of our challenges as well. We've talked about, we also know, in addition to having 60-something routes that have been suspended since early 2020, most of them are commuter and express routes because that, of course, was the market we most immediately saw when our focus became essential riders who were having to get to healthcare jobs, getting to groceries, getting to, those essential services. That tends to be mostly on what we're seeing on our local and our LRT and BRT system. And so that's where we were focusing, and that's where we've seen most of the resilience or rebound. But still trying to balance that. We have a lot of facilities around the region, park and rides, that are temporarily closed right now. We have to decide, are we going to reopen them and establish some level of express service, or are we going to do something completely different with that property, or if we even own it, if we're just in a lease agreement, do we get out of that? So really it is trying to find the balance between, we know some of our riders are depending on us 5 days a week, 6 days a week, 7 days a week for a varied purpose of trips versus the more what I would call the traditional 9-to-5 commuter who was only relying on us maybe twice a week for one trip purpose. And if you can't do, we all know what happens when you try to be everything to everyone. And so this comes down to what are those priorities, and in some cases some of that service probably won't come back.
You have a follow-up?
Yeah, I do have a follow-up. Interesting thoughts actually about the park and rides, and if it's property we own versus lease, and some of the things we've been talking about are different things of how do we serve some of the like outer ring suburbs and things like that, which don't have like pre-existing things that could be converted to mobility hubs and things like that. I'd love to have an additional conversation about that. So there could be some opportunity that could be kind of unique. And like I said, right now we're supposed to build out a transit vision, and that could be something really, really unique to any other region.
Did you ever envision something that's not 5 days a week, like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday?
We have talked about that, and there are some systems. I think we have within our scheduling software, we have the capacity to do specific days. Some systems, particularly those like maybe that are highly focused around colleges and universities, where 90% of their student or ridership is students. Sometimes you will see different schedules on a Tuesday, Thursday versus a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, knowing that the class times tend to be set differently. So it is possible. It is a considerable challenge when you're trying to look at building, pieces of work for operators and trying to communicate that. I think students inherently get that Tuesdays and Thursdays are very different for them than Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays because their entire schedule is different. But most of us don't necessarily think, wait a minute, is today Wednesday or is today Thursday? Which schedule do I need to go and look at? And so that's one of the things that's a significant challenge. Anything else?
If I could add to that, we've actually have looked at that, particularly these last couple of years of, can we provide let's don't operate on Fridays. And there are some possibilities for that, but we're still managing our workforce, as Cyndi was alluding to do that. And when we look at the profile of our routes today, most of them are the 7 days a week kind, and so the proportion of just if we didn't operate on Fridays is very small. It's something we can continue to look at, and really what I think about for that market is how do we provide more flexibility and trip options for people to come in that might be non-traditional trip times that they're taking now compared to before 2020.
One of the things that is in our the chapter of our report that talks about performance is a comparison of express route ridership by individual weekday as compared to on our local routes. And local was pretty consistent amongst Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's the express service where you're seeing significant differences.
Councilmember Lilligren.
Yeah, thanks. And I think this is really exciting. When I commend you on your work and your team's work as well. This is great to be moving on. I have a couple things I want to bring up. One of them is just really technical, and it has to do as part of your presentation in the demographics location slide, slide 16. And it seems like within some of the cities there are these districts or divisions or something going on, and I'm just wondering what those areas are.
So this is a map by zip code. That was the information that we asked survey respondents to provide.
Okay.
Also, just as a quick kind of threshold, we define inner suburban as pretty much anything inside the 694, 494 Beltway, with the exception of the West Metro, where we used Highway 169 instead, because 494 is so much further west. So that's how we define it. We know that there are communities who straddle the Beltway, of course, and in that case, we basically, is the majority of the community on in or out. And so it's a bit of a blunt tool, but I think it gave us at least, we really wanted to be able to compare certainly Minneapolis and St. Paul against suburban areas, but recognizing that not all suburbs are the same. Maplewood is very different from, Lakeville, for example.
Great, thanks. So there's zip codes. I was looking at these with all the sort of district overlays
Yeah,
that I
no,
think
there's
of
zip codes.
did not recognize them, so that's helpful. And then the other two kind of areas of questions I have to do with sort of route adjacent issues or items. And you think of, for a rider, its predictability is key. And so for me, how I express that in my transit riding is through Nexttrip, right? An app, a web-based app. And so I know this is route focused and service focused, but I'm just wondering how things that contribute to predictability, like technology, fit into the planning that we're doing.
You got something?
I know.
Should I still vote?
I think it's a good, Councilor Lilly, it's a good question because it's a little bit, I think the root of your question is we're thinking about how we can make our service reliably and consistent and easy to use. And then there are pieces, when we sit together in our Network Now Technical Advisory Committee that includes folks from transit information and folks from regional administration, we kind of talk about each of our individual pieces. And so, our transit information folks, when they look at Network Now, they're like, okay, where are you going with some of this? Because do we need to adapt anything that we're doing based on the changes that you are making as well? So not maybe a super definitive answer for you at this point, except that, we try to coordinate all the various pieces that make the customer experience.
I'll add one other point to that as well. When Sophia showed the slide, that's basically what does this encompass, what's in our scope, what's out of our scope. One of the things that's on that is speed and reliability. And those initiatives, whether it's bus lanes, it's queue jumps, it's signal priorities at intersections, it's the whole toolbox of things that we know can help us be more attractive, either because we can at least have a consistent travel time or bypass areas that are bottlenecks. And so once we have some lines on maps, kind of have an idea of this is where the majority of our resources are, this is the majority of our hours and such. One, I would say, next step out of that is to say, okay, well, what else can we do to make these more reliable? Is it that we need to talk to MnDOT about a bus lane in this corridor, or do we need to be working with the community to, so that I think is an outcome. Once we figure out where we want to put it, then how can we best do that?
And Mr. Channing, I do have one other question.
If I can follow up to that, but great question, because I can tell you I asked the same question at the last transportation committee meeting, because we had a presentation on Micro, and Micro has an app and Metro Transit has an app. And I'm like, okay, how do we get these things, and they're both gonna be doing some developments, because the point is you want to travel easily and reliably. So, you want to take, maybe you needed a bike share to do this, that'll connect to Micro, that'll get you to Sea Line. And something that does that and helps plan that, I think, is really what we need to start looking to and be a little more creative with. But yeah, I stumped the room and asked the question
Thanks.
too.
No, it's really helpful. It does feel like it could be part of this, right? Somewhere, or at least kind of appear in another. Oh, I'm sorry. Sure.
I was kind of being a bus guy. You hear multimodal. Well, what I'm interested in is intermodal. How do you connect from one mode to the other on a real live basis?
I love it. And then the other thing is kind of adjacent to this as well, and it's very surprising, I don't know, just be comforting or surprising to me to be talking about transit service, especially sort of immediate planning, and not hearing the word safety at all. I think Councilmember Johnson is the one person who said that word, And it just seems with reliability, quality of service, that even when we're at this place where we're putting lines on maps and things and route planning, that safety is part of the conversation. I mean, that contributes to any kind of growth in ridership. And so I'm just wondering what you think of that, or why the word safety hasn't appeared anywhere.
Yes, so there's a couple of thoughts. I will say, one of the ways that we can address safety issues is through frequency of service. So if bus runs more frequently, you're not waiting as long for it, and so that is the one area that service planning can directly impact safety. Another part of this is by getting, by having this all laid out, it helps, whether it's Metro Transit Police or other resources, understand, okay, well, this is where the majority of the customers are going to be. Here's the areas where we're going to be operating in the past midnight. Helps them to be able to strategize instead of just, trying to respond to whatever they see. So those are pieces that service planning can certainly help contribute to the discussion. But yes, we heard that very loud and clear as we were out doing our workshops in the spring, and it doesn't matter how great your service is if I don't feel safe when I get on it. Absolutely.
And I would just suggest that people are looking at this, right? I'm really impressed with the response rate to the survey and things. So you're doing really effective outreach. And to me, if I were just a not Met Council member of the public, I would be looking for that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to hear that you're hearing that. It doesn't surprise me at all. So that's my thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Lilligren. I'll second everything you said. I think that's pretty great. And then too, just as it relates to Metro Transit, but you don't remember we have other jurisdictions that we're in partnership with. So that has to, be kind of part of the plan. I want to, also we'll talk to the downtown council because it's a core, but we have St. Paul. And then, we do have, suburban job centers, big ones. So I don't know how you might want to try to get to those, but there's chambers of commerce that could, bring some folks together in the Manufacturers Association and things like that. So I just,
Yeah, I can comment on that because that's something that we've worked on for years, is knowing that there's Minneapolis and St. Paul, that we actually do work really closely with those business associations. But there's also the suburban job centers, and we work directly with particular associations, whether it's in Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, or along the 494 corridor, or along 494 Plymouth. And so I think we could have a whole nother presentation on how we meet those needs and the desires for those suburban jobs, because it's a different kind of challenge than we see in the core. And it may be worth coming back to that at some point because it's very different.
And then, may I add, we glossed over a lot of the wonderful things that we heard and conversations that we had, but I just do want to point out that we reached out to most of the chambers of commerce. Originally, many of them actually sent the survey to their business membership to get feedback, and some of the numbers that you see are non-rider business folks. And then one of the groups that took us up on coming to hear about Network Now was some of the chambers kind of get together, and we went to one of their meetings, and it was in Birdsville, but they meet other places. So we really tried to lean into those needs as well.
Well, that's my daytime job, so I don't know if we got it. Normally we're pushing things out, but I know there's an appetite in the suburban communities, both the job centers themselves, but also the city officials are nervous because they know that there are openings, and where are we going to get these people and how are they going to get there? So just don't forget, I just found out, I think from the city managers of Plymouth, as one of my cities, is the third largest economy in the state of Minnesota. So, there's stuff happening, and they need employees, and people need good paying jobs. The only other thing I'll say, and it's not for today, but as a chamber member, I got invited to attend a MnDOT presentation. The Minnesota Chamber I had a couple of special presentations on the Rethinking I-94, and I thought that was fascinating. So there's 5 potential options. It's moving through a phase. Apparently, Met Council's been involved in that too.
We're proud of that.
Yeah, and that kind of like, well, how much are we involved in this? Because the options are varied. And that can substantially change the way that corridor works. And I mean by one is filling it in, and then all the other stuff that comes up. So and they have a year of 2027, and I'm sure that, on paper will move a bit. I bet it really will move a bit. But that's a big thing that's happening too, and people are being made aware of it, outside of the corridor, because it will impact the entire region. So as it relates to this stuff that we're doing, there's, a potentially very big change that could come to transit in that corridor. So I just wanna, as much as we can do to get the word out, or what our role is, or what the impacts could be as it relates to our whole system. So, and it doesn't, I was just, kind of struck at what potential things could happen.
And I think Adam and I have both been involved in going to Rethinking I-94 meetings since about 2015 or 2016. So we're definitely at the table in those discussions. There was a whole separate BRT feasibility study that was done that is maybe not necessarily getting a lot of focus as they're trying to as MnDOT's trying to get through other parts of their project, but we've definitely been at the table and aware of what they're thinking of doing.
Councilmember Pacheco.
Mr. Chair, members, when listening especially about the chamber, since I have no interest in it myself, is that this first ring around the cities, like where I'm now representing Richfield, is predominantly Latino. Most of the first rings are more diverse than they've ever been. And I don't hear a lot about what we're doing there, and if the survey was done in any other language, and working with chambers. I'm going to a meeting tomorrow where the Minnesota Chamber and Twin Cities United Way are setting a fund just for the ethnic chambers. Because we're growing and they're picking up all these little storefronts. We just finished a workshop on buying your building if you own a restaurant. Because they tend to open another restaurant without buying this building and having that equity, and what is available for doing that, and just buying your property overall. So there's a lot of work being done there, and I think we'd be more than willing to help. And I'm organizing a meeting with just the other chambers on what's happening with cannabis. Where are we going to be in this, in the development of that business, the $1 billion business kind of dropped in here. If we're going to left out, we'll be just the consumer again. So it's there's a lot going on, and there's some great chambers there. The Hmong Chamber's been active, and with the Hmong Farmers Association, and I'm with the Latino Farm Association. So just reminding you that we're still here.
Oh, Councilmember Pacheco, we'll definitely take you up on any of that. We appreciate connections. People respond to us better sometimes when we're reaching out through a connection. We, just for your background as well, in the first phase, we did translate the survey in a one-pager to help, why would you take this survey into multiple different languages, including Hmong and Spanish. And we had some staff actually on our system specifically targeting Spanish speaking and other folks speaking in that language as well. So.
Any other thoughts, questions? All right. Any more for your section? No? Very robust, in process. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, before we go to the next agenda item, I just thought I'd share that at the end of the fourth, the Twins are leading 2-0.
Glad we're tracking.
My public service.
All right.
Mr. Chair, as we're transitioning to the next item with Lesley and stuff coming up, and with some of the executives from transit in the room, I just wanted to share, I shared with some of our colleagues here today. Once again, I was at a community meeting on issues of unsheltered homelessness and opioids use in the Native community. It's a regular meeting, subcommittee of the Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors, and one of the people present was giving a report on his very, very direct outreach. He and his teams clean up encampments and provide services to people, relatives sleeping outdoors. And he spontaneously brought up the excellent work of Met Transit and the Homeless Action Team. And he talked for a considerable time, a couple minutes, about the work, how they work hand in glove with the community, and how he wishes every unit of government would have a Homeless Action Team type action and things. And so I just wanted to say that in this room with my colleagues and with our senior leadership, that people notice what we're doing. And
Thank you, Councilman. And you know, in introducing this new topic, it's really important to keep in mind that this is not just arithmetic and numbers. This is about human lives and really advancing sustainably our mission to a very big vision. So so welcome. We're having, is it Lesley and Charles and Ed and Marie's here, and my gosh, we have the whole tribe here. I mean, the whole brain trust. Speaking of numbers, are you going to start with arithmetic, or
I'll wait till slide 5.
Oh, okay. All right.
Good afternoon, Chair Committee members. Ed Petrie, I'm Director of Finance at Metro Transit. I have with me Henderson, Lesley, Kandaras, and Charles Carlson. We're going to take a kind of a tag team approach on different portions this evening, but we're going to talk about the metro area transportation sales tax. Overall, today we'll talk about just a quick overview of the sales tax. We'll go through some of the forecasting and some of the work that we have done. We've been working on this over the last 3 months. It's been a heavy lift, but we've been doing a lot of work on it. We'll talk about some of the work that we'll be doing with the budget development and scheduling. And then we'll go and transition into some of the transit system planning and visioning. So I will kick it off from here. I first wanted to stress with this whole thing that we've tried to take a very thoughtful and smart approach with what we've done. We've been really trying to develop a baseline forecast. So we have kind of a feel for where we are at. That gives us kind of a spinning board that we can then move from there. Because one of the things we'll talk about this evening is we've developed basically a 30-year forecast. Wholly from many different things, and I'll talk about that in my remarks tonight. But one of the things about this forecast is this is a forecast that's a living and breathing document that we want to analyze and review and update every single year. And keep it rolling a 30-year roll. So we can really look at it and be proactive in our planning. So really take a very thoughtful and smart approach in what we are doing. So first of all, let's give you some background on the sales tax once again. It was a 3/4 cent sales tax. It actually went into effect on Sunday, October 1st. The sales tax breaks down about the first 17% goes to the counties that are for services including transit. It's estimated that the counties will generate about $88 million in calendar year 24. Then it breaks down to the next 83% of that will then come to the council. Of that, 5% will go to the tab for active transportation, and the other 95% will then come to the council's transportation divisions for transit operations, maintenance, capital projects, and state of good repair. The 83% portion that will be coming to the council, we estimate will generate about $400 million in calendar year 24. So we're talking a lot of money for us moving forward. One of the very, very important things with this money, though, is it's very flexible. We can use the money, like I mentioned, we can use the money for operating, capital maintenance, state of good repair. So we can use it for all those different various buckets. I mentioned we have been working on a 30-year forecast. Within our 30-year forecast, we have used at this point in time a 3% growth rate for the sales tax. We've been looking at some historical, we've been looking at like what we use for motor vehicle sales tax. We set a baseline number right now at 3%. We want to watch very closely over the next year, see what the sales tax, do we generate the $400 million? Do we generate $450? Do we generate $350? We want to really look at what actual receipts are and what the new forecast is coming forward for the motor or for the sales tax, also motor vehicle sales tax, and then redo it again next year. So that's one of the things that we feel 3% is realistic. We feel it's conservative, but we feel it's realistic. So that's what we wanted to start with as setting a baseline going forward. The 30-year forecast, we'll be reviewing it in its entirety. I mentioned on an annualized basis. We'll include not only looking at the sales tax, we're going to be re-looking at motor vehicle sales tax, looking at the trends that we're seeing with that. The big one is ridership. We've been looking at ridership, looking at how ridership is returning. We're forecasting that for 30 years. We really want to watch ridership trends also, because that has a major input on our operations and on our financials. We'll also be looking at every year expenses, inflation, and breaking the inflation down by categories. Whether it's parts, anything computerized, fuel, any of these different category utilities, and really continue to break that down so we can re-look at and re-forecast the forecast. We'll be looking at capital projects, capital maintenance, but also re-looking at every year our state of good repair of all of our assets. We've done the initial assessment for the blue line, for the green line extension, some of our BRTs, but we're gonna do some additional work on that and continue to work on that and refine the numbers as we go. As we know more information, historical data, you can help to forecast moving forward. But also, like I mentioned, we'll be looking at the sales tax receipts and use that for future growth and for future forecasting. Along with the sales tax came some legislative requirements, as we always call it the group of 13. There were basically 13 requirements that we have to do along with not only the operations data report on capital, but also there's some things that are required within legislation. I have these broken down in some main categories. First of all, improvements. It includes improvements to both our regular route bus service levels. You know, this could be number of routes, timing of routes, frequency, all those types of items. Improvements to public safety is an item listed. Accessibility on all of our transit stops and transit centers, and some new replacement shelters, new and replacement shelters. There's also a focus on BRT, bus rapid transit. This could include both planning and project development of bus rapid transit, but it also includes both the ongoing operations, capital maintenance, and state of good repair of the bus rapid transit. We also are required to look at other investments, which would include not only the zero emission bus transition plan, looking at microtransit, which would be for all providers, looking at active transportation, and also wage adjustments for the hourly employees. These are all the items that are, we call it the top 13, that are built within the legislation. Some of the impacts of the transportation sales tax, first of all, is the operations deficit. I think many of you are very well aware and very familiar that every year when we come and talk about the operating budgets, we'd always talk about we have this fiscal cliff coming. And the last time we talked with you last year, the fiscal cliff was coming in state fiscal years 26, 27. It was estimated at about $300 million and then escalating from there. One of the things with the sales tax now, the sales tax will cover that state fiscal cliff, our fiscal cliff moving forward, and that is one of the uses of the dollars. Number two, there is any of the county's responsibility for transportation operations subsidy funding October 1st. As you're aware, many of the counties provided up to 50% subsidy funding for like the Metro Blue Line, Green Line, Orange Line, North Star Commuter Rail, and then for the future lines like the Blue and Green extensions, and also then for like the Purple Line and the Gold Line. That now became council responsibility effective October 1st, 2023. And I think you recall I brought forward a capital amendment on the third quarter amendment that adjusted our 2023 operations for the last quarter of 2023 about $9.5 million, replacing the county's subsidy funding with sales tax. And then in our 2024 proposed budget was about $49 million. And then it escalates from there going forward. The other impact that the sales tax requirements clarified for us is the capital maintenance costs. One of the things that we have been talking about with the council over the last few years is capital maintenance, but also LRV replacement. We know, for example, our LRVs have a 31-year life. We have a number of LRVs on the original Hiawatha Blue Line that are going to be replaced in the year around 2034, 2035. Major expenditure. 10 years later, we will have the Green Line extension, or the Green Line vehicles coming due for replacement. Right after that, towards the late 2040s, we're going to have the Green Line extension vehicles coming due. One of the things when we get into the vehicles this evening, you're wondering, well, what about North Star? North Star vehicles have a 50-year life, 45 to 50-year life. They're going to start coming due in about the year 2054, 2055 is when we're going to have to start encumbering those funds for replacement to the late 2050s. So next year when we come back before you to review these forecasts, we'll start bringing in the North Star component into the forecasts. Some of the sales tax opportunities, first of all, it's given us the ability to understand our obligations and our opportunities. As we've discussed, we've done a 30-year forecast, prepared that this summer. But we also wanted just to get a feel for what it's really, because one of the things that we've always done historically, we've talked to you, we always called it a toolbox, which is a current year and 4 years looking forward for operations. This gave us actually the ability not only look at that, but forecast it for 30 years. So like I said, we've done everything, operating, all the new lines coming on, all the capital maintenance, all the state of good repair requirements, putting that into a 30-year look forward. So gave us that ability to really look at that. It also provides us the ability to have a financially responsible cash flow. Because that's one of the things that we had as one of our cornerstones, in fact, is that we need to have a 30-year look. We need to look at expenditures versus the revenues, but we also want to be good financial stewards, but also be financially responsible. And that if hopefully we're balanced, and if we're not balanced, provide opportunities and our suggestions of how we can get to a balanced solution. As I also mentioned too, the annual review process, like I said, we'll be coming back, looking at actual sales tax collections. We'll be looking at a new forecast. We'll be continuing to revisit all of our investment plans. We'll be looking at operating and capital revenues, revisiting all of our assumptions, whether it's MBES, passenger fares, state appropriations, federal funds, the sales tax funds, and reforecasting. We'll look at all of our operating and capital expenditures. We'll look at the new CIP. We'll also look at inflation, what we're seeing on bus parts, rail parts. We'll look at anything computerized, which, as we'll talk about in the CIP presentation next week, that's one of the areas in the CIP that we're really hitting higher prices. Anything that's got computer components to it on repair parts are really going up. We'll also look at all of our other inflation parameters, ultimately then to develop the 30-year plan. The final thing is it gives us the opportunity to develop a transit system vision, working with the council, so we can then come to you and say, this is what we're seeing, this is what we're forecasting, and work with you on the vision, but also gives us the ability to work with our partners and also with the community. So that way we know we can lay the numbers out, but then we can talk about it and say, this is how things are looking, what do we, is there any changes, are we hitting the mark, or do we want to make any adjustments? Because we want this to be very much a collaborative and a discussion point and discussion effort on this. So Mr. Chair, now we can talk some numbers. It's my favorite part of the presentation. So. Okay, talking numbers.
Just a second, Councilmember Cobb.
Yeah, just a quick question about how long, you may have said this and maybe I missed it, with the 30-year, like the first cut of that plan, that forecast plan take? Is it months or weeks or?
Chair, committee members, what we've done is we've actually done a 30-year outlook. We've forecasted everything to year 2053.
So it's already refined and?
Your question is about the process of making that forecast. Do we have it in place now, or
Right.
is it's a living document, so it changes?
It's a living document, yes. So we've basically set our parameters. We have our assumptions, and then you inflate it or whatever parameters you want. Take it out to year 2053. State of good repair items, for example, we've worked with like the light rail folks and identified when they're going to have to do catenaries, when they have to do track, when they have to do the vehicles, and try to pinpoint those by year. A lot of the other items, for example, like operating costs. You just take your operating costs, you just apply a general inflation to that. But you add on to it if you're adding some additional BRT lines and those types of items.
Okay, so underneath this, there's a lot of detail. Probably pretty thick, I would imagine.
It's a there's a lot of.
Spreadsheets.
It's an indulgent of spreadsheets behind it all.
Councilmember Harper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a good question because this is a very tight presentation, but there's a ton of detail and been a lot of consideration behind all of this. And really to our finance and transportation and transit staff, they had to do it in a very short time because we needed it for budgeting coming up in the next month or so. But there is a lot of thought put behind all of these numbers. We all know they're going to change because circumstances will change into the future, but this is really a solid footing for us to kind of build from, and really trying to look at all these different things we were tasked with, rolling in the capital maintenance piece. But lots of detail behind it.
And Councilmember Chambliss, I think as we go through the slide here and go through the different pies, I think it may hopefully answer one of your questions also. Okay?
Mr. Chair.
Councilman.
And we've been doing this, and that's how we knew there was a fiscal cliff, right? So, you know, we're now adjusting into the forecast this new money, which is the slide we're at
That's
now.
correct.
So, and to Councilmember Barber's point, I mean, things will change, but we have the A-team
We have a baseline.
on it so that we can know where we're at any given point in time. And if anything tips down the road when we're all gone, they can take that to the legislature and the governor and tell them all about it too.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
And just to kind of add on to that, this also provides a whole lot more detail than we've had before on the capital maintenance side, because we never had a source to pay for the capital maintenance side. We knew expenses were coming, had great concerns about what they were. This provides a lot more detail on that.
And when we have a structural deficit, even on our existing operations, it's hard to think about, and then how we're gonna pay for capital maintenance. We actually did have an answer.
Exactly.
And new capital maintenance.
Rita, did you have a question?
Well, yeah, well, I'm going back to, I think it's on page 4, because I don't have my glasses on, but the other impacts addresses operations deficit previously forecasted to begin in 2026 to 2027. Seems to me, I know we've gotten, income along the way and we've moved things around, but we've had several previous dates, I believe. So this, how fresh is this 26 to 27 date based on where we're at currently? Because I thought we were gonna hit the fiscal cliff a lot sooner than that.
Chair, committee
But we have
members,
federal
Federal
assistance.
stimulus.
Go ahead.
Right, so,
Yeah.
COVID
yeah,
money
but
bills.
so
You are-
that's
you're-
what I'm saying, let's
Councilmember Chambliss, you are totally correct.
target.
Over the last 5, 6, 7 years, we've come to you every year, and in every budget presentation, we've talked about this fiscal cliff coming. Many, many years, we were fortunate enough to receive from the legislature one-time funding. That kept band-aiding us, I'll just use the word band-aiding us moving forward. Then when COVID hit in 2020, fortunately, the council was a recipient of $725 million of federal funds, of which 686 was for the council. We used those funds then, additional funds then, to keep carrying us. That helped to push the fiscal cliff out 2 years, 26, because you were right, the fiscal cliff was coming sooner, that pushed it out 2 years, 26 and 27. So the last forecast update that we had done was back in January, February of 2023. During the legislature, but then pre-sales tax. At that point in time, I believe the number was $288 million. $288.1 million, I believe was the exact number. That was our fiscal cliff coming in 26 and 27. We knew that because we had built up reserves with the council's help. We had built up operating reserves, use of the federal funds that would carry us through to fiscal year 26.
Perfect, thank you.
All right.
I could talk numbers all day, Chair.
We're gonna listen to your presentation.
Okay.
And
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, and Charles should weigh in too, but just as we're walking through this, I think it's important that this is a forecast based on assumptions and assumptions about what we know about our system, what's coming up in terms of our asset management. It's based on council policy in terms of what our 2030 vision is for the metro lines and so forth, but they're assumptions, not decisions. This is really about us taking what we know and making some educated guesses to give you a feel for what the sales tax brings to our system, but we haven't made decisions. We're really providing, kind of doing our homework for you to then weigh in with those decisions through the budget process. So just want to make that distinction, and certainly as Ed walks through, we can dive deeper in any of those assumptions we made. And yeah, it's a 30-year forecast. We guarantee it's wrong, but that's why, because things will change, but that's why we're thinking about this in terms of every year going through this process and updating information. And certainly as we gain more experience with sales tax revenue too, that will help us refine this each year as well.
And that suggests, and I appreciate that, Lesley, that the forecasts are always wrong, particularly as they relate to the future. That has not happened. But I think that building this model based upon assumptions and based upon some of our own principles. We had principles for transit now. Well, I love that this includes prudence, because we're really taking care of our assets. It is embracing those 13 points which are part of our kind of longer term plan and legislation. And also our aspirations, thinking about these pilot programs, and I'm not gonna get into that, but I mean, how we can, this provides for some opportunity for a larger vision. But most importantly, we actually have to take care of what we've got, which is exactly. Councilmember.
And Mr. Chair, thank you, I appreciate that. And just briefly, those who haven't served in local governments are doing this every year too. And they can have the same thing happen with, their tax receipts that come in and all of that, and revenue and intergovernmental transfers and things. So it's fun to come see it with all the big numbers here at the Met Council. My numbers were big at the City of Plymouth, but not this big. But this is just best practices, and again, we have a great team that's working on some really important things, and and the transit policy work group, I'm just so grateful that you guys are doing this, because it's gonna set us up for success. And then when we know that there's a problem, we will know it well in advance.
Yep.
So that's key. So I'm just grateful.
One of the questions, just trying to get some understanding. So this previous structural operating deficit, as we go forward in the 30 years, that's going to be shrinking.
Chair, committee members, that's based upon our current assumptions that we have today as far as for inflation, the cost for fuel, cost for utilities, cost for labor, all those items are built into the structural deficit of $8.1 million. We'll update that every single year with whatever the new forecast and what the new assumptions are. So that 8.1 may go down, it may go up.
But clarification, our previous structural deficit, in a way, has been resolved because we now have revenues, so this was a concept that we were facing since October 1st. There will be no structural forecasted deficit because we have the resources to not only cover that cost, but then these other obligations that we are taking on, and longer term capital maintenance costs to make sure that our system stays in the state of good repair. Councilmember Harper.
The way that I envision it is we've got the list of all the things that we need to pay for it. And there's based off by priority. The first thing is that structural deficit, which starting in 2026 would be the 288 and whatever numbers. So that's the first thing with the sales tax that we're basically paying off. It does make it go away, but that's how, when you look at business numbers, that's how you kind of look at them. And that would be like the first thing that you check off. Then we do everything else.
So that 38% would be paid off the first year. It wouldn't be like a melting kind of like year.
Well, part of the way of thinking about structural deficit, we usually call it structural, is because it happens every year.
Right.
So if you think about revenues being at a certain place and the cost being a certain place, when they're upside down every year, we're not building up reserve or digging a big hole. And when we've solved it in the past through both federal relief and then maybe one-time kind of budget relief, but only for 1 year at a time. This is a sustainable year after year, if that makes sense.
It's a game changer, and why we all breathe a big sigh of relief at the end of the session.
So Chair, I was going to say maybe I start just walking through the slide and kind of explain the numbers.
Yeah.
That may help and answer a lot of the questions also. So our forecast right now is just over $21 billion at a 3% growth rate for the sales tax. So then we start identifying then the things that we know, the things that are given. We know, like we talked about the structural deficit, the blue part of the chart. We had the structural deficit starting in 2026, fiscal 26. We forecasted that forward to 2053. That's about $8.1 billion or 38%. That is known. That is what we have, that's what we have to cover. That's that first piece. The yellow chart, or the yellow slice, is the replacement of the county's contributions. As you recall, starting October 1, they're no longer doing their or providing contributions for the blue and green line extensions, orange line, gold, and purple. So basically what we did, we took what their contributions were from 2023 and from the gold line financial plan when the various other lines were going to come in, we then inflated those contributions at 3.15% to match what their terms are in their master operating funding agreements. Forecasted that forward, that's about $4.2 million or 20%. We also then have the build out of the metro lines, according to the council's plan.
Alphabet soup.
What's that?
I said it's an alphabet soup.
It's an alphabet soup. Yeah, yes, it is. Yes, it is. I had to pull my notes here. That includes the J line, the K, L, H, B, E, F, and G. So it is an alphabet soup. That's about $3.9 million for the operations of those lines that the council will now be responsible for. Then we have the next slice is the lime green slide or slice. That's about 5% or $1 billion. That's for the capital preservation of all those metro lines that we'll be adding. Then the final slice is the orange slice, which is the rail fleet replacement. As we talked about, we're going to have in the 2030s the replacement of the Metro Blue Line vehicles. In the 2040s, the replacement of the Green Line vehicles. In the late 2040s, the replacement of the Green Line extensions. That's all now going to be council responsibility. We previously did not have a funding source for that. That is just over $1 billion or 5%. When you total all of that, that equals 86% of the pie, or $18.3 billion of things that we know that are either happening, structural deficit, or the council's plans are filling out the rest of these guideways. What that leaves us with then is that purple slice, which is $2.9 billion called new initiatives, or about 14%. Those are items that we can then discuss with the council, discuss with our community, et cetera, of opportunities for investment. And I know Lesley and Charles will talk about some of those items this evening, but that's so basically the point of this slide is to basically identify that there's about 86% that is currently planned.
And I appreciate you're saying these are based on estimates and assumptions.
Yes.
Assumptions on the revenue side, and this is really the pie chart for the uses. But it's a 30-year period.
It's a 30-year period.
Long time.
Subject to change.
But directionally, and I appreciate what this is setting up, is to say, even with those obligations, our kind of general feeling is that we'll have some space to consider new initiatives.
And one of the things, Chair, that we'll look at also when we review this next year, the fact is that, like we said, we've used a 3% growth rate on sales tax. We think it's real, we think it's conservative. But on the flip side, we may have some higher inflation that we're not anticipating, some higher state of good repair items that we're not anticipating. So it's a baseline. It's a baseline for us to.
On our costs.
Yep, exactly.
Councilman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do appreciate that comment on that. I think the one thing that we need to make sure, fellow person in business, you understand this, is cash flow and timing with some of this. So it's not, we don't get to go spend 14% of the 30 billion
Today,
or the 30-year forecast today. We need to figure out how that's gonna go. We know some of these things are gonna ebb and flow, especially in the early years. So when we look at new initiatives, I think we need to be really strategic in the next, 2 to 5 year window of what can we do that really make impact, but still fit into the forecast over the long term. So that's the kind of conversations we'll have as we get into more weeds as we do this. So.
Councilman Chamber.
And yeah, just to kind of tie off to what Councilmember Barber said, that those new initiatives are kind of like our discretionary spending over the 30 years. That's a long time period, so we don't know the specifics, but we do have requirements for the bus rapid transit investments as well as the micro transit. So do we know, let's just say we were gonna focus on 5 years of the 30 years to start with. Do we know how much of those new initiatives would be, the new ABRT or the new micro transit? Or is that something that we're gonna be figuring out in the next few months or?
Well, I would suggest we jump to the next few slides because I think Lesley and Charles are going to talk about this new initiative process and how we think about it, as well as the budgeting process. So,
Yeah, and I'll just mention, Chair, Councilmember Chambliss, and I want Ed to correct me, but I think part of what's interesting about that list of 13 is some of it is baked into this work already, and some would be areas the council may think about doing more as new initiatives. So it's not easy to put in one or the other slot. I don't know if that made sense, but I think part of the assumptions in the kind of committed or obligated pieces of this pie include our metro lines through 2030, and then even a couple more ABRTs after that. So that's a way of saying like our ABRT plan, like the Network Next plan that the council has approved back in 2021, is part of the kind of obligated piece of that, not the new initiatives piece. Is that
That's
fair
correct.
to say? Okay.
That's correct.
So that's why it's a little messier, I think, to explain. But one way of thinking about this too is, even though we had things planned, we didn't have a way to pay for it before the sales tax. And so, they're not necessarily new ideas, but the sales tax allows us to bring it to fruition and,
And to sustain it over
and
time.
sustain,
And Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I mean, and I'll look at Chair Barber on this, who's the guru in my world, but the people are learning that the money will be sent to the Met Council. In fact, as a Chamber of Commerce, we're letting all of our businesses know that this is the thing you have to be doing now and all of that good stuff. But I think what people don't know is how much of this is obligations that we're taking on that we didn't have before. So, it's that county operating revenue piece, and they're getting new revenue too, so hopefully they can be partners down the road in other things that are going on. So, yes, we've moved away from the fiscal cliff. This funds our projects. We have extra capacity in the future, but look at the obligation though that was sitting that we now know we can fund that I don't think the regular public had any idea was part of what we call the fiscal cliff. The two word fiscal cliff and the depth of what our obligations were, including that we are taking on the county operating
The
responsibilities.
transit cost,
It's
operating
huge.
costs.
It's huge.
So to put some dates together and where the sales tax kind of all fits into the whole budget process here at the council. You've seen this calendar before. We have statutory requirements. Those are the ones in red. So we've passed September 1st. That was when we set the levy. We set it at a 2%. You have until December. We can decrease that amount, but we cannot increase it past that 2% when we presented that back in August. Next week, you will see the capital program brought to the council meeting. That will include any updates that we have on the operating side and then our 5-year CIP program. We will then ask the council on October 26th for adoption of that public comment. And that's where it's open to the public for comments. We will ask council members to promote our budget through their means. We have newsletters and social media that we will ask, we'll also be posting on our website for comments. We have a statutory requirement to pass a budget by December 20th. So at the December 13th council meeting at 6 p.m., it's very specific in legislation, we'll be asking the council to pass that. But that is not where this opportunity for developing this new transit vision for the council, for adding into our providers and partners and community, and that's where Lesley and Charles will talk about. We fully will bring whatever comments that we have in December, but we won't be able to put them in a timely manner for any changes into the budget, but we'll present whatever we have and then have some thoughtful, smart conversations about what do we add into the 24 budget through budget amendments then within 24. So again, these are opportunities, these are open for discussion and moving forward. So that's kind of the timeline for with our budget and dates requirements.
So council members will pivot into some of the new opportunities and new initiatives that could stem from this, but maybe as importantly, the engagement and the process that we will be able to pursue against these. So again, just to emphasize the pie chart, the $21 billion over 30 years, that is not a budget, that is not an investment plan. It's a forecast of our revenues and a first understanding of the obligations that the council has been given by the state so that we can have a baseline of what our opportunities may be for additional investments and initiatives. Some of which you'll be asked to adopt in the 2024 budget, such as assuming the rail line obligations.
Others will play out over a longer time period, and that's kind of what this next section begins to cover. The 2050 Transportation Policy Plan is a chapter of the Regional Development Guide that is underway and is progressing toward expected council approval in early 2025. So this is a concurrent process. As we're looking at the new revenues, we're looking at the entire transportation system. The entire transportation system revenues, including MnDOT, local governments, and transit providers in the region. So that's a look through 2050. That is the planning horizon for the development guide, Imagine 2050, and for the transportation plan that would be a component of the guide. We are seeing a really significant expansion in revenue in the metro as a result of increased federal funds in the last few years, increased state funds this year, and other revenue sources. So in that plan, we've historically had a current revenue scenario and a increased revenue scenario, pointing out time and time again the need for significant transportation funding increases. Those have now occurred. So we're not anticipating a increased revenue scenario as a realistic near-term outcome for the transportation system. We think a lot of those are actually in place. It does not mean that every transportation need is filled or every priority is satisfied. However, it is reflecting what we believe is a reasonable assumption of revenues that are actually now passed into law and will be phased in over time. So that's sort of the high-level overview of how we'll be approaching financing in the TPP versus the first estimate that you saw tonight. The TPP does not deal in small initiatives or small details or service plans. It focuses on major projects, major highway projects, major transitway type expansions. We talk about trends, we talk about challenges, we talk about priorities. We develop a range of objectives and strategies and actions, but it is not the fine-grained service improvement plan type document that would be implementing a vision for some of these funds. There are also some differences in the plan from the projection you've seen tonight. One is that the forecast only goes through 2050, not 2053 as tonight's. That's a small difference. But another difference is that the TPP will assume a Riverview Transitway in the funded plan. We don't have enough detail right now about the potential mode for that corridor. Planning is underway, locally led for a bus or rail alternative. We will know more in the future on the outcome of that plan and would be able to then reflect it in the forecast. So that's one difference in the TPP. We'll recognize that mode because it's currently in the plan. Another difference is that the baseline will assume 3%. We'll have a baseline revenue that assumes 3% growth, consistent with what we've talked about tonight for both motor vehicle sales tax and for sales tax revenue. But historic averages are actually higher for both of those funding sources. So there may be a higher level of revenue that could increase above the estimate that you've seen tonight. That'll be captured in the TPP, as well as project opportunities that could accompany that should a higher level of revenue be assumed. And then finally, financial estimates include all the transit providers. So the TPP is the region's transportation plan. It is not solely the council's transit vision, and that would be the product of broader work. However, the various transit providers around the region are included in the TPP and would be also included in engagement that the council will undertake to determine uses of the funds as we move forward and develop policy around any funding distribution. So that also is work yet to come. No estimate for that tonight. Really, that would be the product of engagement with transit providers using our Metropolitan Planning Organization role. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lesley to talk about one of the transit providers' upcoming work that is under the council's purview.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Charles. So Charles just spoke about the region's transportation policy plan. Transit is one piece of that, and Metro Transit is one provider of that. So I'm going to talk
It's
about
the largest provider.
the largest provider, but just kind of we're shifting scales here. But this is another process slide. So really, I wanted just to make sure the council's aware that at Metro Transit, we are starting a process to really co-create a vision and a new strategic plan to guide our work. When I say co-create, I mean along with our employees, but also with anyone who is interested in participating in the process, our customers and community. So the idea is, this isn't specifically about sales tax implementation, but wanted to talk a little bit about where we're heading with this tonight, because I do think this process will help surface some ideas for really where those new initiatives could go, and just kind of get a better sense of what people are really expecting from Metro Transit as a service provider. So we are starting the process of developing this new vision and strategic plan. Metro Transit has long developed strategic plans, so that's not a new exercise for us. But certainly the time right now with the sales tax, but also changing travel behavior, and just it feels like now is the right time to re-engage again internally and externally about really what our focus and priorities should be. As listed on this slide, we're not starting with a blank slate at all, and you heard about Network Now earlier tonight, which is a key piece of our current strategic plan. But we have other pieces of our strategic plan, the Safety Security Action Plan, our Great Workplace Project, which is really about making sure we are an employer of choice and we're recruiting and retaining employees to carry out all this work. Our work as part of the council's broader climate action work plan. So I think we're building on a strong foundation, and part of, as we move forward with our visioning and strategic plan work, it'll include assessing kind of where we are now on some of those initiatives. And so I'll also mention too, we're doing this mindful of the fact that 2050 work is going on, the TPP, the council has a strategic plan, and we've in the past with our strategic plans been able to successfully align with those, and really this becomes how we operationalize that within Metro Transit. So I don't anticipate it'll be different with this new document either. So we're just in the early stages of this. We started asking our own employees during our current series of employee town halls, what they view as their ideal transit system, their ideal workplace. We're trying to get people to think big, just to really get us kind of in that visioning mode. And we're going to expand that more externally starting in the month of November, and we'll be starting to communicate more about that this month. So we created a webpage, metrotransit.org/forward, to kind of label this effort, and of course more to come, but again, wanted to mention it tonight as one of the processes underway as we think about this new investment. So I think with that, Mr. Chair, our presentation.
That's great and wonderful high-level presentation. I know there's, as we talked about earlier, a lot of details in each one of these, but it's a continuing working process, and we're going to get a chance to talk about elements of these as we have been all along in the months ahead. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate your comments. Yeah, this is, I think, really profound. It just, we're looking at things differently than we could have a year ago, and just the stability and certainty with an ability to really plan for the future is just such a great opportunity. And when you talk to other transit agencies, everyone's trying to come back after the pandemic. We're in a different position than other transit agencies, and even regions. If you look at funding, as Charles mentioned, to the entire state from the transportation bill, the funding for transit, all of this, we're set apart right now, where other places are looking at us going, wow, you guys have money to go do things and build great things. A good example I wanted to bring up in response to the TPP comments about the increased revenue scenario. When I first came on council, communities were begging for us to put projects into the increased revenue scenario, things that would not be funded for years and years and years. And that is something, that going away from that plan shows you what a profound different position we're in right now. So it's very nice. It's a very different way we can look at things and plan to the future. But I also have a question. So we know the sales tax started on October 1st, and it's a shift in how we pay for things too. So do we have a short-term kind of sort of cash flow planning for how we're gonna manage things over the next couple of months? As this, because I know anytime you stand up a new system, it doesn't matter where you do it, it takes a little while before it's working completely right, so.
Mr. Chair, committee members, that is a concern. We're not sure exactly when the money will come in. Some businesses pay monthly, some will pay in quarterly, so cash flow is a concern. However, we have reserves. We also have a cash policy here at the council that if we were to go negative, greater than 12 million in 3 months, we would be in front of you for an internal loan for ourselves. That is not, our reserves are actually above our target right now, and so we can wait until we see how the cash comes in and manage it within our means.
Thank you.
Great question. And on the point that Councilmember Weber was making about structural deficits, we're not the only transit system that had a recurring annual deficit. And I just came back from Philadelphia. SEPTA is a well-operated transit system. There's much to be envied and much to be learned from. But when they were hearing about that we are actually not having any structural deficits going forward, they are very envious, and there's a number of systems around the country. So we really stand out to be able to capitalize on this time to do it with great thought, prudence, and good thinking, as you've just kind of outlined.
Quick question. If we get to that internal loan point, would that come from internal transit reserves and not other council funds like wastewater, for example?
Councilmember Grimm and committee members, so our cash is separate by funds, as it should be. We cannot use wastewater fees for transit. Our cash itself, though, is pooled, and we would be able to, it's on paper, show the covering, and the negative interest then would be paid back to the pool of cash. But they are always separate.
Good answer.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Johnson.
And again, I just really appreciate serving on the Transit Policy Work Group, because those were my concerns too, serving on the Management Committee, and we know where our reserve balances are and when we can tap into those. So again, we should take comfort in, the new money that's coming in, and also again, this wonderful team that knows how to manage to that and get it before us in a timely manner too, so that we can continue our operations without having to stop and interrupt. We want that reliability to our customers, and we have to maintain things. So I am very excited about this, and it's not just because the legislature did this for the region, not just the Met Council, but it's for the people all across this region. But again, I just don't think we say, well, we probably say enough. I just don't think it's printed in the news or shared publicly how wonderful the staff here is throughout the council. And they have their heads down every day, and they're working hard, and things are going as they should. And sure, as in any organization, things will happen, and we'll learn and do better. But the majority of what's going on here at the Met Council is great work, and it's because people like this here choose to serve at the Met Council and throughout the Met Council. So I just hope the media one day will cover things about fiscal stewardship and all the great things happening in the environment work that we do in wastewater and parks and just transportation. So I'm just here to say, Janet Moore, you're gonna write a great story. We've got great people here in our organization that are making sure that things are working for everybody across the region.
I'm sure many people are listening. Councilmember Bento.
End of the 6th, 2-0.
Very important. Game 2, it'd be really important, right? Okay.
What innings?
6th.
Top of the 7th.
Top of the 7th.
Not that I'm watching. Any other,
Just on that line though, the Twins playing, whether they were pretty up and down, but they're pretty steady, but it really does make a difference downtown. I mean, when I go to lunch, and if you see all the people out there today, and every time there's a game, or there's an event, so it's getting better, I'll just let you know.
And I do wanna give a shout out to Metro Transit
Yeah.
staff, Lesley, Brian Funk, who employed BNSF to consider again if we could have special service for these games for North Star, and they are delivering. So that is
And
really
Mr. Chair,
important.
I mean, we're playing the Chiefs on Sunday,
And they are providing
and you know
service.
what that
Oh,
means,
exactly.
right? So she might be coming
That
back
has
again.
Maybe
escaped
come back.
us.
People think she is. He thinks she is, the tickets prices are high, so.
My daughter, who is in the demographics, says she is a goddess and she's a goddess for transit. Any other thoughts, questions?
I don't have a question about this presentation, which was excellent, but I do have a question before we adjourn.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Are we having the employee appreciation event on the 16th?
That's our plan?
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, I hadn't heard anything, so.
Oh, well, we'll get back to the whole council with the plans for that.
Is it on our calendars?
We had a save the date thing a while back, I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, that's why I.
Yeah, we'll get the update, we'll get updated information.
I didn't check.
It might
Unless
be
it
in
was just
your,
put in.
it might be in your mail right now.
Oh,
Was it just
It's a
put in
paper.
because I emptied mine? Okay, I'll go back. Is it an invite to, they can sit on our calendars that we can accept? That's always.
We're
helpful.
invited, yes.
Yes, well, it's just easier to accept an invite than look for paper. I
Oh.
try to remember to input it into my multiple calendars, so.
Charles, Lesley, and Marie, thank you. You are the brain trust, and this is really exciting. I appreciate the questions, the comments, and your presentation. And as we just discussed, this is just the beginning, so we're gonna have much to consider going forward. With that, we have 10 minutes to your day. This meeting's adjourned.
Thanks, guys.
2-0, go Twins.